This may well be even worse than has been described.
Oh, I am so excited about this.
These are not normal times.
The day is going to come where nature is not going to be so forgiving anymore. And that day is coming quickly with climate change.
I promise you, a day will come.
A major catastrophic problem is going to happen.
Of the accelerated melting of the North Polar ice cap.
If we just continue sort of on the way we are now, there's no hope whatsoever of reaching the year 2000.
Because it is coming, no matter what.
Now is the time to begin to heal the planet.
It's not a question of whether or not the national power grid will go down. The question is for how long.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
There's just, in my opinion, far too many people on this planet.
We really are facing a potentially ecological Armageddon.
This is not a prediction. It is a certainty.
It's a real threat, and it's coming.
They're known and feared as killer bees.
It truly is a planetary emergency.
Every study that's been done indicates that we're driving full blast for the edge of the cliff.
January 1, 2000, the day the world shuts down. Put that in your heart. Y2K.
Go on the internet and check it out.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Al Gore.
We live in an age of fear, but humans have never lived longer or been healthier. We are constantly being told that danger is nearby and that our lifestyles will kill us. And now we are being warned of a new super catastrophe. According to many scientists, Al Gore and the environmental movement, global warming caused by burning fossil fuels is going to destroy us and our planet. Al Gore says it will destroy whole civilizations, cause famines, and create an unprecedented refugee crisis. But is this threat real? And exactly how costly to humanity are the proposed solutions?
The idea that Al Gore has posed that we can stop using fossil fuels in 10 years is completely reckless. It's simply not possible. 85% of global energy is fossil fuel today, and we depend on it for our survival in so many ways.
The people who are calling for massive carbon dioxide reduction, the Al Gores of this world, are in fact the enemies of poverty reduction in the developing world.
Even in America, we will not escape the ravages of following the Al Gore's plans and programs and policies about global warming. Poor people in America will become poorer.
Global warming is one of the biggest controversies of the 21st century. Environmentalists are pushing for changes that will impact the lives of people everywhere. But the science and the claims of the environmental movement need to be examined. In the past, there have been scares and misinformation. And sometimes, the well-meaning actions of environmental activists may have led to the deaths of millions in the developing world. Much of the current concern about global warming has been generated by Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. This Oscar-winning film declared that the world is in danger from flooding and extreme weather. But after a lengthy hearing, the British High Court has found that the documentary is scientifically flawed and has 9 significant exaggerations and factual errors. John Day is the lawyer for a parent who sued the Ministry of Education after they decided to show the film to every British schoolchild.
Well, what the judge decided in this case was that, first and foremost, he found that it was scientifically inaccurate and that those inaccuracies exacerbated the one-sidedness of the film. The judge identified 9 aspects of An Inconvenient Truth, 9 core areas where Al Gore either misstated the IPCC or prodigiously exaggerated what they had found. For example, in relation first and foremost to sea level rises, which is perhaps the starkest error in Al Gore's film, arguably. Al Gore gives the impression that sea level is going to rise by 20 feet in the very near future. The IPCC talks about 20 feet sea level rises over millennia, over thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years, and sea levels rising by a matter of inches by the end of the century. Now, that is a very disturbing misstatement of the science.
Despite the High Court judgment that an inconvenient truth contains significant errors, exaggerations, and is politically partisan, the errors and exaggerations still seem to be getting through to children, such as these youngsters from Northern Ireland who've been educated in the British system.
The ice melts from the Earth being too hot, and it whooshes over and it goes down into the sea.
I'm worried because it might happen here, and most of us will die.
There's a lot of people that can't swim, and like they'll just go down, and like you can't just fly float forever, because like it's just like so tiring.
Environmentalists claim, and children believe, that melting glaciers and polar ice will cause catastrophic sea level rise. They blame man-made global warming. But experts disagree. Shun Ichiekasufu is a professor of physics and the founding director of the International Arctic Research Center at the University of Alaska. He is one of hundreds of scientists whose research contradicts the alarmist beliefs of environmentalists. Professor Akasufu devoted the last 50 years to studying the Arctic climate, and his research proves that the receding of ice sheets is due to natural forces and is not caused by humans.
Of course, we have ice in the Arctic Ocean, and it has been receding. But again, this receding began around 1850. Not just, the last 50 years. That happens all the time as a natural phenomenon. So it's very difficult to simply associate all the changes in the ice to carbon dioxide.
There's a real unbalanced situation in the media, always trying to look for the global warming connection. The fact that the Antarctic ice sheet, on the sea ice around Antarctica, is growing rapidly. The fact that the Arctic ice is not disappearing the way that we've been told. As a matter of fact, it came back even larger last year, and this year looks like it's going to be even more extensive, but that doesn't get reported in many media.
Another area of an inconvenient truth that was found to be inaccurate was the issue of polar bears.
My picture is about the polar bears and because the sun's melting the ice, and then the polar bears can't stand the hot and they could die.
Penguins and polar bears will be on it, and they'll all fall and get crushed into the ocean of it. Very sad, because polar bears are my favorite animal.
Actually, the number of polar bears are increasing in quite a few of the areas of their range. There is no evidence whatsoever that the polar bear population is declining, and the main threat to polar bears is hunting by human beings, not climate change.
Polar bears as an example of a very clever piece of manipulation by Mr. Gore. He's a career politician, he's an expert in persuasion, and polar bears is a particular example of that. It's something which children can very readily associate with. It has a very heart-rending impact on children. It's something which will stick in their minds. It's something that they will resonate with them, and something that will cause them huge concern. And for that reason, it's particularly insidious to use that type of manipulation in the classroom.
I don't feel very happy about it. I just feel sad.
Patrick Moore is a founding member of the environmental organisation Greenpeace. Dr. Moore, who has a PhD in ecology, left Greenpeace in the mid-1980s, feeling they had become an extremist group which followed an anti-human and anti-science agenda.
I don't believe that there is a climate catastrophe. I don't use the word chaos or disaster to describe the present changes in climate, which are well within natural variations that have occurred in the past history of the Earth. As a matter of fact, we're in an ice age right now. It may be an interglacial period, but it's only 14.2 degrees Celsius average temperature on the Earth today. At the height of the ice age, it was about 2.2 degrees cooler at around 12 degrees. But through much of the Earth's history, it's been at 22 degrees Celsius when there was no ice at either pole and all the land was tropical and subtropical. In fact, ice is the enemy of life. Frost is the enemy of life. When you pass from the tropical into the subtropical and then into the temperate regions where there's frost in the winter, biodiversity plummets by about 90%. I don't think it would be a bad thing for this Earth to warm up.
Many environmentalists and activists campaigning about global warming have stated that the science is settled and that there's no need for further debate.
One of the disturbing facets of the global warming debate is the suggestion that the science is settled and there is something wrong with revisiting what we claim to know. You know, in 1975, Newsweek magazine had an interesting story titled "The Cooling World." And it says, among other things, to scientists, these seemingly disparate incidents represent the advanced signs of fundamental changes in the world's weather. The central fact is that after 3/4 of a century of extraordinarily mild conditions, the Earth climate seems to be cooling down. Now, 1975 isn't prehistory. Some of the same scientists who are telling now that we're warming were active back then.
In the 1970s, one of those who believed the Earth was facing an ice age caused by humans was Professor Stephen Schneider of Stanford University. However, Professor Schneider is now one of the leading scientists claiming the Earth is heating up because of man-made global warming. He's a senior member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and a close advisor to former Vice President Al Gore. Professor Schneider was with Al Gore when he heard he had won the Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm, of course, deeply honored to receive this award.
In the 1970s, Professor Schneider was a leading voice warning of an imminent ice age. Today, he gives frequent interviews warning the complete opposite, that we are all in danger from imminent global warming.
Don't be poor in a hot country. Don't live in Hurricane Alley. Watch out about being on the coasts or in the Arctic. It's a bad idea to be up on high mountains with your glaciers melting and losing your water supply. And if you're in a Mediterranean climate, you're going to have a fire season in the summer. It's really going to be a problem.
Professor Schneider was interviewed for this documentary. We asked him about his belief in the 1970s that there was going to be a new ice age. After the interview, lawyers for the university wrote to us stating we could not use our footage of Stanford and that Professor Schneider was withdrawing permission for his interview to be screened. According to legal advice, we are prevented from screening Professor Schneider's image or footage of Stanford filmed during our interview, but we can report what he said using an actor saying his actual words.
I was initially in 1970 and 71 more worried about cooling.
Indeed, Professor Schneider in the 1970s published papers and praised books which warned of the devastating consequences of the forthcoming man-made ice age. But within 10 years, Professor Schneider and the scientific consensus was claiming the Earth was experiencing global warming.
The scientific community is very, very confident that it's warming.
Despite this dramatic reversal of the scientific consensus, Professor Schneider, Al Gore and their supporters are now urging governments to increase taxes and ban oil, coal and gas, the fossil fuels that are the main source of the world's cheap energy.
The power of our democracy.
There have always been stories warning of the end of the world. They feature through all of history, from ancient civilizations through the Middle Ages and into the modern age. Some observers suggest these predictions of an imminent catastrophe may be based in the human mind rather than in solid science.
In my lifetime alone, I've lived through, I don't know, a half dozen scares in which prominent scientists were predicting cataclysmic events unless drastic action were taken. And the one I remember well because I covered it as a journalist was the mad cow disease scare, the BSE scare in Britain and then in the rest of Europe.
19 minutes after the hour, in the land of the beef eaters, mad cow disease has a lot of people worried. Many British schools have dropped hamburgers from lunch menus, and 5 European nations have banned British beef imports.
You had scientists in Britain predicting 500,000 deaths per year on account of infected beef.
There's no known test for the condition. The incubation period of the disease can last more than a decade. There's no known cure. And the credibility of the government experts is now as suspect as the carcass is now hanging, largely unsold, in British beef warehouses.
And does anyone talk about mad cow disease now? Mad cow disease, in its human variant, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, ended up killing about 200 people. Now, I don't want to trivialize the death of 200 people, but 200 people is a very far cry from 500,000 people being killed every single year. Now, it's worth asking whether we're not simply reliving precisely that kind of scenario. Alarming science, possibility of catastrophic consequences, millions dead, further millions displaced, and so on, that we're not living precisely that kind of scenario in the current conversation about global warming. People tend to have very short memories when it comes to this, and there may be some kind of psychological, social predilection to a kind of mass hypochondria. You know, the fear that the end is nigh, that we have to take dramatic action, that we have to reshape our lives, or else there will be some kind of catastrophe.
But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
The environmental movement, which is now calling for a ban on coal, oil and gas, has its origins in a campaign that began 5 decades ago. Rachel Carson, an American marine biologist, claimed that the pesticide DDT was a danger to animal and ultimately human life. This very effective campaign led to a near worldwide ban on DDT, which had disastrous consequences.
Well, it all began with Rachel Carson, and it began with the notion that DDT was single-handedly responsible for the decline of predatory birds like owls and eagles and hawks. And at the time, the story was believed by everyone.
Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's 1962 best-selling book, demonized the pesticide DDT, which had previously been considered a life-saving invention.
This occurred largely because of speculation, not really documented by good scientific evidence, and it became a movement. It became an enormous movement.
Well, Darren, this is, of course, the Going the Distance pre-convention tour for Al Gore. Here, in touting his commitment to the environment, one of his favorite issues, he toured the Rachel Carson homestead. Silent Spring, credited by many, including Vice President Gore, as the book that really set the stage for the modern environmental movement.
Of course, the banning of DDT on a worldwide basis caused organizations like the World Health Organization and USAID, humanitarian organizations, to stop using DDT for the control of mosquitoes which cause malaria. That clearly resulted over the last 40 or 50 years in millions of people dying because DDT was no longer being used. It had been eradicated from large parts of the world, and still is, thankfully, but other parts of the world, particularly Africa, continued to have the malaria-bearing mosquito, and after the use of DDT was ended, malaria skyrocketed in countries like Uganda and Mozambique and South Africa.
Malaria has caused havoc in this country. It has caused a lot of damage to the economy of this country. On an average, you are talking about 370 children dying every day. So we're looking at hundreds of thousands every year. And we believe that even those who die of HIV/AIDS, most of them die, at the end of the day, die because of malaria.
Roy Innes is the chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CORE, one of the oldest American civil rights organizations. CORE was at the forefront of the March on Selma, the infamous Mississippi burning voter drive, and Martin Luther King's historic March on Washington. With the end of segregation and overt racism in America, Roy Innes is now fighting what he sees as another major human rights issue for black people. He is campaigning to overturn the ban on DDT, which he says has led to the deaths of 30 million people in the developing world. Most of the victims are children.
It is a human rights issue. Human rights and civil rights are intertwined. Things that affect people's development and things that tend to retard people's development is a human right and a civil rights question. To see a modern city as developed a city as Kampala, to see people still being victimized by malaria and victimized by those who will prohibit the use of DDT to protect themselves. It's a very painful thing to see.
I'm Don Roberts. I was a professor of tropical public health, and I taught at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. That's our DoD medical school. And I've had a career doing research in medical zoology, specifically on malaria and malaria vectors, and some on malaria epidemiology. Malaria is a parasitic disease. It's transmitted by mosquitoes, specifically Anopheles mosquitoes. The number of people infected with malaria in the world is just a guessing game. The estimates vary from 300 million to 500 million, upwards to 800 million. This is a terrible burden of disease on poor people in poor countries. It is a serious public health problem. And the people who are saying that we do not need DDT, I would have to assume have an agenda that is separate from the agenda of controlling malaria, reducing death, and reducing disease in vulnerable populations.
It is really for all of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that we fight to protect the air we breathe and the water we drink. And it's for them that we also fight to honor the legacy of Rachel Carson.
I see misery. I see misery that could have been avoided. These people must be forced to consider the pragmatic consequences of what they hope for or what they believe. I don't believe that the people who oppose DDT are just evil people, but they're people who are wrong. Mrs. Fiona Boynes lost a baby, lost a small child to malaria. She has become the premier advocate in Uganda for the use of DDT as a way to avoid other mothers suffering what she has suffered.
I had two children, a daughter and a son. The son was the second born. One day my son got sick with malaria. I thought it was just simple malaria, and we gave him some little tablets, 2 days. On the third day, he became very, very weak. I said, oh my God, I should take this kid to the clinic. When I took the kid to the clinic, they injected him, I think, chloroquine. That's what I because after injection, he got like woo, like that, and he bit his tongue, I saw blood coming out, and then the doctor said, rush this child to Mulago Hospital. I went, I rushed, we took the child to Mulago Hospital. When we reached there, by the time we reached there, his neck was, like this. Just in few, he died. I stayed there, I think within maybe half an hour, everything stopped. And the doctor came and told me, I'm sorry. That was death. I didn't even know.
We have adults that don't know how to think. They don't know what to base their faith on. They don't know how to choose a spouse. They don't know how to run a business. They don't know how to handle money. They don't know how to tell the truth. These people need an opportunity to learn how to think and to have an imagination, to have a talent.
Shelley Gravett, an American who lives outside Kampala, teaches 250 children and runs parenting classes for Ugandan adults.
This is our boundary line that stretches down into the swamp.
As an environmentalist, she is also an ardent opponent of using DDT to fight malaria.
It's beautiful here, it's warm, the ground is fertile. You just put anything in the ground and it grows. And I think to myself, is this so bad?
We are losing 320 in Uganda lives every day. To us, we see it as a genocide. And there is no reason why the children of Africa should be slaughtered like that. There is a solution. USA using DDT and save their lives, and they no longer die of malaria. Why can't Uganda use DDT?
Yesterday, I talked to a lady whose name is Fiona, and she is a proponent of the use of this DDT to go into everybody's house and spray the walls with DDT. I'm telling you, Americans have died of cancer.
No, not from DDT.
Yes.
Not from DDT.
Yes, caused from DDT use.
They used to die from cancer
and
before DDT was used.
Millions
We're
of
not saying
deformed
what I'm saying is giving everyone the impression that DDT has eradicated malaria in the States is wrong information. It's simply wrong. We never used DDT for malaria eradication.
You know what we should do? I think we should get a time and sit and talk. I can't give you my card.
I'm just asking you to get more
information.
We never had malaria in the United States, so we didn't use DDT for malaria. We never had malaria.
The reason that there is no longer malaria in the United States is because of the use of DDT in the 40s, from the mid-40s up into the early 50s, to stop transmission.
The same.
Okay.
Out of them.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause any problems. But it's just as an American.
Uganda is like a paradise here. It looks like, I think, in my mind, the Garden of Eden. Do we really want to bring in DDT? People won't be dying of malaria, but they'll be dying of cancer. They'll be dying of low birth weight and poisoned mother's milk. We probably can't say that, can we?
Many, many studies were conducted to confirm that relationship. DDT caused breast cancer. The end result was that association was disproven. Disproven, but was a powerful motivating force throughout many, many years.
The use of DDT doesn't affect just humans. It's deadly on the environment. It affects bird life. That was one of the huge controversies in the United States, was that it was killing our birds. Uganda with no birds. Can you imagine Elton John with no piano? Even now, just be quiet for just a second. if all of that was gone because of man's careless use of a pesticide?
Well, what's the evidence for that? The evidence is all around us. No country in the world ever made greater use of DDT than the United States. We used it heavily. It went into our food chain. We consumed it. Birds couldn't avoid it. Wildlife of all forms couldn't avoid it. Not one single species was eliminated through those years of very, very heavy use. And the risk that would come from the use of that in malaria control is zero.
In South Africa and other developing countries, malaria had almost been eradicated because of DDT. When DDT was banned, millions were exposed to the disease, and the number of deaths increased dramatically. South Africa recently reintroduced DDT, and the impact was immediate.
Who anointed Free Earth, Save the Earth, Global Warming crowd, anti-DDT crowd, let the blacks and the other third world people suffer with malaria and mosquitoes? I cannot believe that Al Gore has great regard for people, real people.
In 2006, the World Health Organization overturned its ban on DDT, stating opposition to the pesticide has no scientific foundation. However, Al Gore refuses to accept this scientific verdict and still supports Rachel Carson's discredited claims. He wrote the foreword to the 1994 edition of Silent Spring. He said Carson's influence led him to write his first book on the environment. Gore is now campaigning against fossil fuels with the same enthusiasm.
I think Vivi is a great place to live. I think it's a great place to raise children. It's a small town. Everyone kind of watches out for everyone. I think the people in this town are wonderful.
Vivi is a picturesque and prosperous town in Indiana, close to the Kentucky border. Most people in Vivi work in factories and at a power plant just across the Ohio River in Gent, Kentucky. This large concentration of heavy industry has been attracted because of Kentucky's huge coal reserves.
If you look at the bigger picture in terms of the jobs associated with electricity generation and the supply chain with respect to coal transportation, taxes that the industry generates, you're talking more about 7 million jobs in the United States, which is around 3 to 4% of the total employment in the U.S. Coal currently helps us maintain a high standard of living by providing a low-cost source of electric power.
It is this standard of living that is under threat because of global warming activism. Employers say Vivi has a plentiful supply of well-paid jobs because of cheap coal. Global warming campaigners want to ban coal and all fossil fuels, which would devastate towns like Vivi and badly affect the lives of those on low or fixed incomes. It would also damage the American economy, which depends on fossil fuels for 75% of its energy.
Today, I challenge our nation to commit to producing 100% of our electricity from renewable energy and truly clean carbon-free sources within 10 years.
The The most important thing that we need to do to solve the problem is to have a moratorium on coal-fired power plants. That's what the public should be demanding.
Basically, the problem is cars, coal, and buildings. This Congress should enact a moratorium on the construction of any new coal-fired power plant.
So we're going to have to come to an agreement that coal will have to be phased out.
I pledge to fight for a moratorium on the construction of any new generating facility that burns coal without safely trapping and storing the CO2.
I am Tiffany McElhaney, and I live in Vevey, Indiana. I'm married with wonderful kids, wonderful husband. I live and die for my family, do anything for them. In my opinion, everyone has their own American dream to live, but I'm living my American dream. I'm moving forward. Since Tim and I have been married, every step we have taken has been in a positive direction. Industry has provided jobs for the everyday person, has provided jobs for the people who couldn't afford to go to college, or for the people that could only afford, a certain level of schooling.
All of the complex formulas of how we might start reductions years from now and have a little bit in the first year and a little bit more in the second year, I think we need to freeze it.
You know, pollution and CO2 have to be distinguished from each other. CO2 is what you put out when you breathe. And for most people, when they breathe, there isn't a black column of soot emerging from their mouth. CO2 is invisible. CO2 is essential for life. Our contribution to CO2 is relatively small. When you see smokestacks today in this country, it is very rare that you actually see black soot. We have tons of environmental regulations designed to control real pollutants. And we control them, many would say, at a level that has already gone beyond rational, but be that as it may, it's affordable, presumably.
We are told that carbon dioxide is toxic and a pollutant, or a toxic pollutant, even better. Now, it's so ironic because anybody who knows anything about biology knows that carbon dioxide is the most important nutrient for all of life. It is basically the currency of life.
I believe there is tremendous amounts of coal in the U.S. Why would anyone want to take that away? It would mean less funding for schools, possibly less schools. It would mean an extreme cost and living raise. It would mean kids like my kids wouldn't be able to play in bands, wouldn't be able to do ballet class because there's just not going to be the extra money anymore in an everyday household to pay for those things. Case, you wanted orange?
I work at Arvin Sango. I make mufflers for Toyota. $16 an hour, max out pay.
Okay, man, no more sneaking out of the house with spikes in your hair.
What I did before was I worked at a steakhouse making $6.50, I think it was.
I think you knew.
$6.50 an hour. I mean, I couldn't even afford car insurance. The money was so tight. I barely made house payments. We would have to borrow money for food and that kind of stuff. But since I've had this job, we've never been having to do that again.
I want want the big one.
If they don't have an education, they're not going to make it in life. Things have gotten so... I mean, it's hard to get a job at fast food now without a high school diploma. If you have to have a high school diploma to flip hamburgers, can you imagine what they have to do to have a career, to not have to want for anything in life? And I want them to have better than we do. Try to keep it off your clothes, Aaliyah. All right, Kaylin.
Jumping up, down, not, pat, butt.
Sound it out.
Cut, rut.
Guys, I'm gonna go check your backpacks, okay?
Well, for this job, I wouldn't have this nice house. Well, house. I wouldn't be able to afford gas back and forth, food, entertainment.
My ambitions for my kids are to grow up without any worries, to go to college, and be able to create a wonderful life for themselves and their children. Tim and I, my ambitions for Tim and I are, that's tough, I have a lot of them. I want us to be happy, and I don't want to have any setbacks. As long as we're moving forward all the time, I'll be happy. You guys have a good day at school, okay?
If we didn't have coal in the United States, we'd have to find another source of fuel for electricity generation. And at present, all those other sources are typically more expensive than coal.
Although under threat from climate activists, cheap energy means full employment for VV.
If the factory closed down, this area would die. I'm from New Jersey, so I came out here to work just to work, and I like it here, so I'm staying. There's a lot of work.
$2,000 a week. My money, so I make my money for my family. So that's good. That's really, really, really good.
You shut that plant down, ain't nobody gonna have electricity. Al Gore needs to just go on about his business somewhere else.
A lot of the steel-making industries would be out of business. It'd be a drastic change to America. We'd have to find a different source, which would cost more money. Wouldn't be good for America.
This is what it is, the American dream. I'm not from here, but I feel proud of being American.
We're here to fix all the pollution. That's what we do for a living.
You see my trucks, they're not sooty or anything like that. I mean, they do a real good job keeping the coal burnt clean.
Well, it takes power to run that house. You know, you gotta have power. So we're providing power for the people.
Al Gore? Yeah, I think he's making a mistake. If it wasn't without it, you wouldn't have lights in your house. You wouldn't be able, you know, even back in the Stone Ages, campfires and stuff out in the yard.
Turn off your lights. Turn off your heat when you get cold. Turn off your air when you get hot. And then think about that. Man, I'm miserable. What would I be without power?
I don't believe there's any justification in just saying close industry unless you have a viable alternative to replace it. And you can't just say, okay, we'll do everything with solar panels and windmills. You know, that would bring civilization crashing down to its knees and hundreds of millions of people would die. If they want their doomsday predictions to come true, then we should adopt their policies.
In the 1980s, Lord Nigel Lawson was the UK's Energy Minister and then Chancellor. Now a member of the House of Lords Economics Committee, he was part of a parliamentary inquiry into global warming.
The plan is to get an international agreement in which everybody cuts out carbon-based energy. That is going to put up energy costs around the world, including the developing world, slow down, therefore, their economic development, and cause millions and millions of unnecessary deaths, enormous suffering in these countries quite unnecessarily.
Well, the unfortunate thing about solar and wind, they're both radically intermittent. You simply can't base civilization running hospitals and factories and schools and houses and businesses on energy technologies that disappear for 3 or 4 days at a time. You just can't run things on that. We can waste a lot of money on thinking green if it doesn't make sense economically.
If no coal-fired power stations can be built because they're wicked, because there are carbon dioxide emissions, and you have to run a renewable, the lights are actually going to go out. This is the crisis, which most people aren't even aware is on the horizon.
We are at my new house, where it's about 3 miles outside of Vivi. This is the living room, which is a lot bigger than where we're coming from and needs a lot of work. We're gonna put down hardwood floors throughout the house, and it's just not gonna look like this when we're done. It's gonna be a major improvement.
This is definitely my American dream. I've started from living in a little beat-up trailer, moved up slowly to what we're living in now, and now my income has gone up, and now we're moving up.
A political promise to do something 40 years from now is universally ignored because everyone knows it's totally meaningless. 10 years is about the maximum time that we as a nation can hold a steady aim and hit our target.
I think that the man in the street is only just beginning to focus on what all this rhetoric in practice will mean to him or her. What it means is a sharply increased cost of energy, and it means a slower rate of economic growth, and less prosperity all round than would otherwise be the case.
I don't think environmentalists are naive. I think they know exactly what they're doing. I just don't think they care enough or worry enough, because it's not going to affect their lifestyle, what happens to the everyday American.
We're just talking about a recognition of the fact that if a few people have everything, then those who have nothing are going to constantly be doing things in the cheapest way. And the cheapest way is usually the most short-sighted way, which is the most pollutive way, which is going to drag us all down with it.
I think they don't care about people like me in the Midwest. I do think they've lived their lifestyle so long that they tend to forget if it weren't for Americans like me, they wouldn't have the lifestyle they have.
America would be a very sorry place without the coal plants. We need the coal plants. We need industry. If there's going to be a generation to carry on after this one, we have to have it.
I don't know how Al Gore feels we should live more simple. I mean, I'm not the one flying in the private jet. You know, life is pretty simple for me. We want to go somewhere, we get in a car and drive.
Environmentalists claim that emissions from air travel are one of the biggest contributors to global warming. Leo Murray is a spokesman for Plain Stupid, a UK pressure group that uses non-violent protests to prevent people from flying.
One of our main campaign aims, one of our public demands, is an end to short-haul flights. Because I think that air travel is quite obviously the worst example of the excesses of the way that we live now.
I came to Tennessee to see my son. He's in the Army, and he's being deployed to Iraq for the second time. So I came to spend the weekend with him. because it's important to see my son before he leaves. I had to hug him. Maybe Al Gore has flown too much in his life, but we haven't.
If I couldn't fly, I wouldn't be able to visit my family because most of them are up in New Jersey. I have some in Wisconsin, some in Florida. Well, I'd be kind of depressed. I wouldn't be able to visit with anybody. I keep busy doing things, but I just don't feel like I could do anything if I can't fly where I want to go.
I pledge to demand that my country join an international treaty within the next 2 years that cuts global warming pollution by 90% in developed countries and by more than half worldwide in time for the next generation.
Well, he's talking about carbon footprint. Well, pardon me. What does he fly on? His own jet? He doesn't fly commercial on Southwest like I just did. He flies his own jet. Don't preach to me.
Leo Murray says Al Gore is concealing the full story about just how much people's lives will be profoundly affected to satisfy the demands of global warming campaigners.
The truth is that the measures which the science is demanding to prevent catastrophic climate change will affect the American way. It's not going to be painless. You know, Al Gore's given us the impression that we can do it and not really make much of a change to our lifestyles. It's not true.
Flying was very important for my business. I could go from one state to the other within a day. America could not be America without flight. I mean, it takes flight to get business done. It takes flight to get family done. It takes flight to do everything around here.
There are the wealthy that want to do the right thing and what they feel is the right thing. And I think they know that there are people out there that don't live the way, well, I know they know that there are people out there that don't live as well off as they do. But they've never walked the path to fully understand the impact all this change would have on us. And I feel like before they just go around making decisions that are going to affect lives everywhere, they need to take the time to stop and look at the everyday working American and what it's going to do to them and how it's going to affect their children and their grandchildren.
I would say to Tiffany, start the educational process to find out, what her passions, her husband's passions are, and get the education and go in that direction because the writing's on the wall. Things are going to change, and just educate yourself to those changes and be prepared.
I'd say, Tiffany, we're all in the same boat. We all are going to have the chance to make the decisions that we're going to make. All I ask is that you take a longer-term view. Just apply your own logic and look at where the present track is leading us and decide for yourself if that's where you want to be. That's all we can ask for is the truth and having an objective, open mind to try to determine what that truth is. Cool? All right.
I would say to Tiffany, this is just something you have to do for all of us. And it will benefit you as much as it benefits the planet. And then I'd slap her.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks.
Thank you, Donald, for that great introduction and setting the tone.
Ed Begley Jr., the actor, is addressing the Environmental Convention in San Francisco. The previous speaker talked about the scheme he is running, which organises green construction jobs for people being released from prison. The actor seemed to be moved to tears as he rose to speak immediately afterwards.
Very, very powerful. Sorry. Very powerful. To see him get that and to illustrate that in such an eloquent way, everybody was very emotional. I just happened to have to go on microphone afterwards, go up to the podium afterwards. Everybody was experiencing what I was experiencing.
Thank you.
However, Mr. Begley told a different story to a friend when the camera had moved on, but the microphone could still pick up his conversation.
I could have an emotion, please. I got solar panels, I have some things, but I put a limit on it of how much I feel is enough.
And I don't live in a world of stuff is going to make me happy. And because if stuff made you happy, there'd be nothing but happy people living in Bel Air and unhappy people living in the bush, and that's not the way it works. I've been to Fiji. There's a lot of happy people there, and they have nothing.
They don't have electricity in most of their homes. They have precious little, and they're very happy people.
Half of Fiji's population are estimated to live below the poverty line. Outside the cities, most people don't have access to modern sanitation, leading to significant child mortality.
There's just, in my opinion, far too many people on this planet.
I know a lot of environmentalists say there are far too many people on the earth. Well, who are they wanting to get rid of? Because you know they're not going to line themselves up first, because they have an agenda, they have a job to do. So they must be here. So they're going to get rid of people like, or in their minds, it would be ideal to get rid of people, the average American, people like my husband and I and our children, and people in third world countries like in Africa. Lord knows the environmentalists aren't doing anything to help them. So are they going to add them to the list? We're human beings. We all have a right to be here.
That is basically the problem, is that a lot of environmental activists still have not come to accept that the humans are also part of the environment and that they are important too. I have a list of what I call characteristics of environmental extremists that I run through. And the first point in that list is that they tend to actually be anti-human. They depict human beings as some kind of malignancy or cancer on the face of the earth, that there's way too many of us. Guys like Paul Watson and a whole bunch of his ilk are coming out and saying there should only be 1 billion people, not 6 billion people. And I'm going like, why don't you volunteer first then? Right? What a crazy thing to say. That is not exactly a constructive approach.
And I'll lead the effort to combat global warming. You know, I talked about that new market for the new technology. You just got to help our business lead the way. Rachel Carson left us her legacy is a chance to elevate consciousness about the challenges that we face. Unless we act with great urgency, the entire North Polar ice cap could be gone. It truly is a planetary emergency, and we have to respond quickly.
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the environmentalists don't really care about the impact on human beings of policies that they're putting forward. When they suggest that we should ban chlorine worldwide, what do they want? A cholera epidemic? If we drink water with communicable diseases in it that we're not being protected? What do they want to go back to the Dark Ages and the Black Plague? You know, they don't seem to really care about the repercussions on human beings, and they care more about fish eggs than they do about children. And there's something immoral about that, in my estimation. I'm not saying that fish eggs aren't important or that seals aren't important. I fought for wild nature all through my years with Greenpeace, and I'm proud of what we did back then. But I do not understand how people can just write off the whole human race as if it is some kind of cancer on the face of the earth and deserves to be eliminated. That, to me, basically is an act against humanity.
Until recently, those who believed in man-made global warming couldn't explain the internationally accepted data which proved that the Earth had warmed and cooled significantly in the last millennium, regardless of fossil fuel usage. This climate data showed there was a significant increase in temperature in what is known as the medieval warm period. This warming meant that wine was exported from northern England and that Vikings were able to settle in Greenland. The data also showed that the warm period was followed by a mini ice age, which saw a drop in global temperatures and Greenland covered in ice. These changes show that world temperatures fluctuate regardless of human activity. But in 2000, new research apparently contradicted this view. Professor Michael Mann produced the hockey stick graph, which discounted the medieval warm period and mini ice age. Professor Mann claimed that the Earth's temperature had been consistent until the beginning of the 20th century, when because of human activity it increased rapidly.
The IPCC, the UN panel, has come up with 4 reports. And every report had something funny about it. In the 3rd report, they came up with a graph called the hockey stick, which pretended to show that the 20th century was the warmest in the last 1,000 years. But it turned out that it was based on bad statistics. It was really, really bad science.
A couple of years ago, 2 Canadians, a fellow by the name of McKittrick and another guy by the name of McIntyre, neither of whom are scientists, but one of whom is a fairly accomplished mathematician, looked at the data.
I'd seen hockey stick graphs in many business promotions. Typically they are .com sales or profit projections. And while academics may not be familiar with hockey stick graphs, businessmen sure are, and businessmen tend to be quite suspicious of them. Usually there's a trick to them where the blade occurs.
When the 2001 report came out, it was featured very prominently in the report. As a result, the hockey stick graph became central to the debate about global warming. 2003, I got an email from this fellow named Stephen McIntyre, who I'd never met before, but he'd heard my name. He had worked out what he thought was the method that they used, and he'd obtained the data set from man.
We met halfway between Toronto and Guelph out near the Toronto airport.
And he had this big stack of papers, and he showed me his notes, and I thought, well, this is important stuff that he's doing, and here's an outsider, a retired businessman basically, who has no experience publishing in academic journals, and so I agreed to help him work through the math and stats and write up the results and try to get them into print so that people would start understanding what he was doing.
What I'd found was that there was some problem in how man was doing what's called the principal components calculation.
He had tried to reproduce the basic calculations, I mean, just some of the basic averaging steps, and was getting very different results from what was in the hockey stick papers.
When I used correctly calculated principal components, I didn't get a hockey stick.
So then he thought maybe he had some data wrong. So he had gone back to the original sources that were cited.
Noticed many other problems with man's data. There just seemed to be something wrong with this data set.
There were a lot of minor and sometimes major discrepancies between the underlying series and the data that was actually used in the Nature paper. So correcting those discrepancies as much as we could, we just couldn't get anything that looked like the hockey stick.
So I emailed Man in September 2003 saying, is this really the data set that you used for your study? And could you confirm that? And I haven't been able to replicate your results. And he wrote back and said that he was much too busy and important to answer this or any other questions. So I went through this step by step and found what in effect was a programming error. Quite to the surprise of the academic community that would pick hockey sticks out of random data. Let's say that you had a telephone book with 8,000 series in it, one of which was a hockey stick shape. What man's method would do is it would find that one hockey stick shape series out of the phone book. So if your result is that you got a hockey stick, you couldn't ascribe any particular statistical significance to that result.
The views changed. I mean, we got a series of papers into print in good journals. We had a lot of people in the climatology field, once they got past their initial suspicions and took time to study what we were doing, realized that yes, there was some technical errors in the hockey stick, that these did undermine the conclusions.
The IPCC relied on the hockey stick as its iconic statement for the 3rd assessment. By the 4th assessment, it realized it was a hot potato, so it dropped it.
Well, the hockey stick has been thoroughly discredited. The 20th century is certainly not the warmest in 1,000 years. There was agriculture in Greenland, and they were growing wine grapes in England, so in Yorkshire. So, it was clearly warmer, and we also have scientific data to show this.
The hockey stick is not the only global warming science to have been unsettled after analysis revealed flawed data and methods. Until August 2007, those who want to ban fossil fuel use made much of the figures that showed 1998 and 2006 were the warmest years in the history of the United States. These years and their record temperatures were seen as irrefutable evidence that global warming existed and that late 20th century fossil fuel use was the cause.
One of the most interesting developments was McIntyre's discovery that there was something wrong with the data collation, which showed that 1998 or 2006 were the hottest years on record in the continental United States. Al Gore has mentioned that prominently, that recent years have been the hottest on record. Now in June, McIntyre took a look at the data and noticed something strange.
When I looked at individual stations in the NASA methodology, I noticed a very peculiar step change around the year 2000, and when the figures were adjusted, it turned out that neither 2006 nor 1998 was the warmest year in the U.S. 1934 was.
The hottest year on record in the United States was 1934, and on average, the 1930s were a hotter decade than the present decade.
I noticed the calculation error. I sent an email to NASA on August the 4th, and August the 7th I got an email back from them. They grudgingly acknowledged the error.
I'm not going to use McIntyre's name. I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think he deserves the publicity. But I can make some statement if you how can we address it in a general way? Unfortunately, the public does not have the scientific background to interpret whether or not it's important. And the same thing happened with recently with the fellow from Canada who found a flaw in our data record of temperature stations. It was of no importance, but they succeeded in clouding the issue. And the problem is that the public can become confused by that. We really need to know what is relevant and what is important, what is significant and what is not.
Now, that isn't necessarily particularly significant unless you are staking a great deal rhetorically on the present being the hottest on record.
20 of the 21 hottest years ever measured in the human record have been in the last 25 years. The 10 hottest have been since 1990.
I mean, if you're going to say 70 years ago when the population of the United States was half of what it was, when fuel consumption was a fraction of what it was, when there was nothing like there were no SUVs on the road, there were no 747s flying the sky. If that's the case, then that ought to be recognized.
The hottest in the United States of America was 2006. The hottest winter ever measured globally was December of last year and January and February of this year, last month. This is going on right now. The planet has a fever.
But what is important here is that Hansen, before McIntyre's data became available, was fond of saying things to the media such as, this is the hottest year on the record and next year is going to be even hotter. Well, as soon as McIntyre produced his new revised data, Hansen's line changed to say, well, I don't think we should place too much stock on on individual years, on whether they're setting a record or not. So that was, politically at least, a rather startling change in tune change of tune on his part, and it ought to be at least acknowledged.
Claims by activists that the Earth is on an unstoppable path of increasing global warming have been undermined by recent climate data.
Warming has not been increasing. It hasn't even been present for 13 years. There has been no statistically significant warming since 1995.
The Earth has not got any warmer during the last 10 years when it was supposed to. That just flies completely in the face of the global climate models and all the predictions that were made by the International Panel on Climate Change. It simply isn't there.
As you know, the UN IPCC, that is the science group set up by the United Nations, strongly believes the warming is caused by the increase in carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
All these people, and I was one of them for a while, travel around the Earth incessantly. If your aim in life is to accumulate frequent flyer miles, the IPCC is the way to go. This is an unusual review because fundamentally, you are your own editor. So you decide together with a review coordinator whether you pay attention to the reviews or not. Generally, you ignore them. At the end, the coordinating lead authors write an executive summary, which is the working document for a plenary session that is no longer scientists, but is government and industry and NGO, Green Movement representatives, who argue it for days, modify it for political reasons. It's a rather meaningless statement, because you're not told if there was more or less warming than you should have seen. And all of a sudden, that process, which is a very peculiar one, turns into thousands of the world's leading climate scientists all agree. Nobody knows where that agreement comes from. And moreover, to be a leading climate scientist in a field as immature as climate science is not altogether meaningful, and the thought that there are thousands of these is implausible, to say the least.
Well, the IPCC is a collection of top scientists, but they're only in a certain category. They're only the meteorologists and the environmentalists to a large extent. It doesn't include very many people on the earth science side, geology, geophysics, astrophysics. Those people tend not to be part of the International Panel on Climate Change. And many people in the earth scientists see this issue very differently. They see it as climate being caused mainly by natural factors that have been operating for millions of years.
We're losing jobs. One of the big reasons is that it costs so much to get through the web of legal entanglements and regulations that are brought on quite often by the sometimes unchallenged actions of the environmentalists. The path of least resistance is to leave the country, go to India, even to China.
If they stop building coal power plants in the U.S. and build them in places like China, for starters, it's not going to solve any problems as far as global warming is concerned, because all it's going to do is take the problem out of one area where there is pollution control and move it to a place where there's not, and there's already way too much pollution. Well, eventually that's going to spread. It's not going to stop the problem.
Change in China has been absolutely dramatic. There's no question this has been the biggest and most rapid movement of people out of absolute poverty ever in the world. Hundreds of millions of people have seen their incomes and their material life dramatically improve over the last 20 years. We used to say in the FT that China was building the equivalent of the entire UK electricity generating capacity every year. but that's too small a comparison. Earlier this year we had figures which put the rate of annual increase in Chinese power generation capacity at the equivalent of 2 Californias. So it's an extraordinary amount of electricity generating capacity that's needed and has been built. The vast bulk of power generation comes from carbon sources, and in particular from relatively dirty coal, of which China has a great deal, and it's very cheap.
I'm not sure whether it really makes a great deal of sense to have jobs lost in America or Europe to go to China or India, when in fact you're not doing anything clearly for global emissions, because the emissions are just coming from China.
On the issue of climate change, China's basic position is still fairly clear, that they feel this is not a problem that was created by China, and we won't do anything which puts at risk our own growth.
Well, Al Gore would not have the optimism of Dr. King. Dr. King was a prophet. He was ahead of many of us when he saw the possibilities of America. But Dr. King knew the potential of America. He knew that it was a growing, vibrant civilization with all the accommodations available. So all we needed was to bring the people up.
If I had an opportunity to talk directly to Al Gore, for starters, I would show him the utmost respect because he is another human being, even though I don't agree with some of his issues.
Tiffany asked Mr. Gore for a meeting, but was refused. She has now decided to write and deliver a letter to the former Vice President at his home in Nashville.
Dear Mr. Gore, my name is Tiffany McElhaney, and I live in Vevey, Indiana. I'm married with a family. They mean the world to me and are the reason I would like to share my thoughts with you. I would like to start by saying I'm very proud to be an American. I love my country and what it stands for. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. My issues and concerns deal with the idea of moving coal out of the U.S. By doing this, everyday working Americans like my husband and our families will feel major negative experiences in our lives. I don't want to see this happen. Countless people across the country will lose their jobs. This means they will lose their quality of life. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be held accountable for this taking place. What I'm trying to say is, I don't understand how someone, especially a fellow American, would want to take such drastic actions on an issue that is going to change lives in their own country for the worst. I know I'm not the only person in the U.S. that feels this way.
To ask people to retard the economic development, to retard the improving of the quality of life is selfish and unfair.
I invite you to open your eyes and ears to our opinions so you discover this for yourself. I'm not an activist. I'm a wife and a mother who loves my family and cares about their future enough to take the time to write this letter.
My name is Tiffany McElhaney, and I had written a letter for Mr. Gore on some of my thoughts and concerns, and I was wondering if I could read it to him.
He currently isn't in a residence right now.
Okay.
You know, I'm not asking to change the world, just a few minds. So respectfully, I ask you to consider my thoughts. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Tiffany McElhaney.
McElhaney, yes it is. Thank you.
Hey,
Hi.
your way.
That's okay. I'm
How you
Tiffany
doing?
McElhaney. It's
I'm
nice to meet
Dwayne.
you. And these are just some of my thoughts and concerns. And
What
Well, thank you for having the
It was
courage,
very
and-
good to meet you.
And I thank you for your activism on the issue.
Thank you.
All right. I'm sure he gets an opportunity to read it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
How do you feel?
Not sure. I came all this way because I felt like it was important enough to me to ensure the future of my children. Yeah, extremely nervous. I'm even more nervous that I'm still sitting at the end of his driveway.
I do not believe in the apocalyptic, catastrophic, doomsday approach to environmentalism that has been adopted now by so many people in the movement and has caught on with people like Al Gore telling us that we are doomed. Like, the end is nigh has been around for thousands of years. People have been preaching the end of the world since the beginning of the world. So far it hasn't happened. And so, you know, I kind of put my bets on human beings being around for quite a bit longer yet and learning to adapt and evolve with changing circumstances. And I think we're actually beautiful and that we have a place in the scheme of things.
At its best, a modern society ought to be able to say, you know something, there's a problem here, but we'll be able to deal with it. And we'll be able to deal with it because we're a technological society, we're a rational society, because if we don't have the technologies available now to handle a problem, we'll probably develop them simply on account of the need for it.
If we should be forced to accept Al Gore's prescription to prevent global warming, it will have a catastrophic effect on the quality of life of ordinary Americans, in particular the poor and the minorities. So for Al Gore, for the Hollywood set, no real change, or no pain that they can bear. But for ordinary people, tremendous pain, tremendous stagnation, and lowering the standard of living for everybody.
If I could meet Al Gore and show him my children, I would have to say, how could you affect my children the way you are saying it would affect? It would just make life a lot harder for them. It would just make me very sad that he would want to do that, or even thinking about doing that.